Welcome to One Mission Podcast. This is Rick Lance, your host, and today we have an opportunity to have two of our very fine state missionaries that work with the younger generations of people. Of course, we often, very in cliche form, talk about them being the future. Actually, they are the present in a lot of ways. So we're glad to have Ben Edfeldt. Ben came to us via Texas, and he is the director of Collegiate Student Ministries. We are delighted to have him. He's doing an outstanding job. And then Chris Mills, who's been with us for a number of years. Now, how many years, Chris?
I think 17.
17, but who's counting? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And Chris is an associate in that office. So out of deference to his tenure, we'll let him go first. Chris, you had a chapel presentation here with our staff that I think everyone was warmed by it. It was a very fine storytelling kind of experience for what happened in summer missions, springtime missions as well among our students. And if you could just tell us some of the stories, recap that, I think the audience would really be charmed and warmed by that.
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Lance. So One Mission Students is the mobilization arm of our office, and I get to walk alongside college students across Alabama, connecting them with opportunities to serve. We train them to be better equipped as they go, and then there's some funding that BCMs come together to help support students as they go and serve. And this summer we had 106 students serve through One Mission Students, and we're still receiving reports, and I'm beginning to be on campuses and getting to hear some more stories of what's happened in the follow-up. But it was just a beautiful summer of seeing the Lord at work in some powerful ways. Those students that served through One Mission Students have reported 158 professions of faith.
Right.
And they just some beautiful stories of the way they worked from a student that served in South Asia who was out walking in a rural area, knocking on doors, seeking to engage with people, and he met a man, and the man, as he began to share the gospel, the man just lit up, and then he said, I've been waiting my whole life to hear this. I know this is truth, and I want to follow the truth. And that man gave his life to Christ and has since was discipled by that team, and then handed off to the long-term personnel that are serving
Amen.
there. And then another young lady serving in the Middle East in a very difficult situation. Just a hard context. Invested in this one young lady all summer. About mid-July, she sent out an email to her prayer partners and said, "I want to tell you about this person, and I ask that you would pray with me for her salvation. We can see that the Lord is at work in her life." And a week later, she sent an email that said, "You may remember the email I sent you last week. I'm celebrating, and I want you to join me in that celebration. We have a new sister in Christ." And this is
good.
in a place where that's
right.
not a common story we hear. And so the other piece of this that has been beautiful for me to walk through in my tenure here is now getting to look back beyond even just a summer,
right.
but getting to see how these experiences have impacted students in next steps of their lives. One student this summer went back to Cincinnati after having served there the summer before last and stayed. She graduated college and said,
right.
"This is where I'm going to plant my life." And I was at ILC, IMB's training a couple weeks ago, and there were 5 former One Mission students commissioned during that commissioning service.
I was delighted to meet them when I was there.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So it's exciting what the Lord is doing, not only in college ministry here in our state, but literally using Alabama Baptist, BCM, Baptist churches across Alabama to mobilize the now generation to be a part of what the Lord is doing across the globe.
That's wonderful. Those two primarily I got engaged with in conversation at the International Learning Center, 2 from the University of Alabama. They really bragged on Kimberly, their
Yeah.
campus ministry leader there at the University of Alabama. And
Kim flew up and surprised them at the commissioning
Oh,
service.
great.
It was powerful to just be in that room when they spotted
How
her.
about
It was a beautiful
well,
moment.
and that's kudos for everyone involved in that. And Chris, before we segue, I know it's a personal matter, but tell us, you and your wife are trying to adopt internationally. Can you bring us up to date a little bit on that?
Yeah, so we've been matched with a little boy in China and trying to bring him home for almost 4.5 years now, and found out earlier this month that door has closed. We are continuing to pray and would ask the listeners to join us in praying for our boy in China, but even that the Lord might move this mountain and open up the door for us to bring him home. But we had already started looking at some other programs while we were waiting on the slow movement in China, and are hopeful and prayerful that next spring we would bring a little girl from Hungary home, and still so our family may grow by 2 instead of 1 is our prayer at this point. But we'd certainly appreciate the prayer support as we're navigating the road of grief and challenge, but navigating where the Lord is calling us to be faithful and obedient in the next step.
We've been praying for your family, and I suppose it's just a given that with the tensions we have with China, that some of that probably precipitated the closing of the door, and that's one of the sadder moments of this process. But open doors come when closed doors happen. Absolutely. So we'll continue to be praying for you.
Thank you.
Well, Ben, what we'd like to know, and I think our listeners would like to really be involved in, is to know the overall philosophy of campus ministry and student ministry as well, but particularly on our university campus, college and university campuses. So that's an open-ended comment. The question is, would you mind sharing that?
Yeah, of course. Before I even start, I just want to say how grateful I am to serve in a state and with Alabama Baptist churches who make reaching the next generation a priority. I'm grateful for that and see that all the time in conversations with pastors and when I'm in associations. Their heart and their concern for the collegiate students and the middle school and high school students as well. And so I'm grateful to be able to partner with them as they think strategically about reaching this current generation that exists on our university campuses across the state. And so the generosity, through the cooperative program, the generosity through their local associations enable us to be able to call 17 full-time campus ministers or state missionaries to these campuses. And then several of our associations have taken it upon themselves to make some effort towards that as well. And so grateful to be able to partner with them in those ways. We have 300,000 at least students across our state. I may be biased, but I tend to believe that's the most strategic people group that we can focus on within our state.
I agree.
You think about what happens in these 4 years in the life of our students, where they're coming in as 18-year-olds trying to make massive decisions for their life, career decisions, relational decisions, sometimes marital, like a lot of times they'll meet their spouses in college. They're making habitual decisions. They'll last far beyond their time. And this generation is the most trainable and sendable generation there is right now, where they have a heart for not only their common man on campus, but also around the world. And so it's a strategic group that we can work on and minister to. And so as we think about our Baptist Campus Ministries across the state and our full-time missionaries that exist to reach those, it's this may be too simple to say this, but it's not too dissimilar. I think there's a parallel, maybe that's a better word, a parallel that exists when we call our IMB missionaries to go reach unreached people groups around the world. In a similar vein, we're calling our campus ministers to reach their campuses.
Good paradigm.
Their work, they have to understand the context. They live on the campus for the purpose of reaching those 300,000 plus college students. And this is not necessarily a scientific fact that we have surveys to prove, but when you're on your campuses and you talk to our campus ministers and they estimate how many students are actively involved in a local church or a evangelical campus ministry, not just BCM, I think, and this may even be low, maybe 90% of our campuses are filled with students who on Sunday morning aren't in a church, who throughout the week are not involved in local Bible study. So I would say 90% of our campuses are filled with students who are not actively pursuing the Lord.
Right.
And so when we think about why BCMs exist on our campuses, it's for those 90%. Like, we want to take those 10% that for the most part have been discipled by their parents and their families and our local churches, and we want to turn their face toward that 90%. And as we engage those 90%, what we're seeing are story after story of students who hear the gospel either for the first time or understand it for the first time in their life, and recognize that it's more than just understanding Jesus is our Savior and has died for our sins, but that He repurposes us. He calls us to do the work that He has prepared beforehand in Ephesians 2:10. And showing that to our students that they have been saved for purpose. And immediately it's for their campus. Then eventually it's for their workplace and for their communities and for their own families. And we begin to instill basic but critical discipleship skills in their life. We're graduating students who understand that their job as a follower of Jesus is to share the gospel with their neighbor. Their job as a follower of Jesus is to disciple those that have been saved. And their job as a follower of Jesus is to have a concern for the nations, what Chris has talked about.
Right.
And one of the reasons why I was looking up this quote while you were talking, one of the reasons why we send students and make it a priority, I think it was C.T. Studd that says, the light that shines the furthest shines the brightest at home.
That's right.
And so
well-known quote.
If we are passionate about sending students as far as we can, they may not stay there forever, but when they come back to our towns in Alabama or to our campuses in Alabama, they have a better worldview and they live on purpose.
Right.
And so our BCMs and our campus ministers exist for the purpose of taking this, again, the most trainable, sendable, moldable generation right now that there is, 18 to 22-year-olds who are making life decisions for themselves and saying, hey, let's make Jesus the center of your life. Let's talk about what it means to have a personal relationship with Him. Let's talk about what it means to be engaging our neighbor, and let's talk about what it means to be in community with one another. We begin to see, I think, a revival in our churches because these students will graduate from college, and we joke with them all the time. They can't stay at the BCM forever.
That's right.
They're eventually going to graduate.
Yeah.
And so where they go is to be a part of a local church. And we're theoretically, and not theoretically, but practically, we're graduating students who know how to share the gospel, graduating students who know how to lead in small group Bible studies, graduating students who have a heart for the nations. And what is that going to do to our churches?
Yes.
We're gonna have leaders, 23, 24, 25-year-old leaders who are walking into these churches, who are looking for a church, who are looking for leaders who will set the pace and share the gospel, who are looking for Sunday school leaders who will lead a growing and healthy Sunday school or small group. We're looking for people who want to participate in the mission of the church, which is to reach the nations with the good news of the gospel. And when our students are getting this intensive lab experience on the campus,
correct,
they are ready. One of the beautiful things is about collegiate ministry is we're training students to do peer-to-peer ministry, and that peer-to-peer ministry will grow with them when they're 22 or when they're 62 or when they're 82. And this idea that they're to share those that they rub shoulders with, share the gospel with those that they rub shoulders all the time. So what I say to my campus ministers all the time is the BCM exists simply for this: to see the lost saved, the saved discipled, and the discipled sent. And so when we think about kind of the pillars of our BCM ministries, and it manifests itself differently with every BCM. We give them some autonomy to figure out and contextualize it for their campus. But we're going to talk about evangelism. We're going to train students in evangelism. We're going to talk about disciple making, multiplication, to reach. I think the most effective way we reach masses of people is not large group events. It's training students how to share the gospel with somebody, disciple them, and then multiply themselves. I don't have the math in front of me, but I think the math would add up to, if we did that, within 30 years, the whole world would be reached. If every person shared the gospel and discipled them to multiply themselves,
Right.
the gospel, the whole world would be reached.
Missional multiplication.
Yes.
Yeah.
So evangelism, disciple-making multiplication, missions mobilization, and kind of woven in all three of that is leadership development. And those are the things we focus on. We want to be a safe place for Christian students to come to and find good community in, but we are a BCMs exist from, and I think the charge from Alabama Baptist churches is we're going into the dark places on our campuses to share gospel, disciple, and send.
That's well stated. Both of you, very well stated. A couple things. Ben, you're relatively new. What are two or three pleasant, positive surprises that you've had in this new role here, or newer role, in Alabama Baptist life and with the campuses? Anything you'd like to remark on?
Sure. So personally, one of the challenges of this role has been coming off the campus. And
Yes.
so for 16 years, I was on the front lines of ministry. And so this role has removed me from that. But what's been the joy of my job has been to be able to walk through this calling, which has been to walk through and walk alongside our campus ministers and watching them as we focus on those things that I just talked about, evangelism, disciple making, missions mobilization, leadership development, watching just the Lord move across our state. I think Alabama is primed to see God just do phenomenal. He already is doing phenomenal things on our university campuses. They're his campuses already. He's already there. He's already working, and our campus, watching our campus ministers discover just pockets of students that they engage with and get it. You know, we've talked about Bama. Bama has just had some great multiplication models. I was there last night and listening to a student who, when she walked onto the campus, wasn't a believer,
Right.
and has led multiple students to the Lord, has been a part of missions mobilization, and is standing up on stage challenging her fellow students to go on mission.
Yeah.
Hearing stories about another campus where they've just kind of had a couple of dry years of not seeing a lot of students come to the Lord, and within the last 2 weeks, 4 students have come to know Christ, and most of them have been led to the Lord by other students, and it's just creating an excitement on there.
Is that Jack State?
That's a Jack State, yeah. And watching another campus where a campus minister started there two years ago at West Alabama, and literally walked onto campus with no students, and this year has had 70 to 80 students show up
that's
for worship
great.
service.
For that relatively small school.
A relatively small school, reaching athletes and having all kinds of access to what God is doing. At Alabama A&M, their first worship service this year, they had over 300 students gather.
Well, amen.
And you're watching student after student being led to the Lord. Just from North Alabama to South Alabama, we're seeing even at Mobile just some really great movement of students who are exploring ministry, callings into ministry. We talk all the time in our state about this lack of students going into ministry, and I think that's legitimate. But what we're seeing on our campuses is an increase in that responding to God's call to what ministry might look like in their life.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the biggest joy that I've had in this job. And I don't say this just because I feel like I'm supposed to, but it's legitimate, where I feel very supported by you, and I'm grateful for that. Very supported by our local churches, that when they really start to hear about what's happening on our campus, they get excited. It's interesting to me, Dr. Lance, that when I watch kind of nationally, like Southern Baptist nationally, that anytime things like the BCM is talked about, that it riles people up in a good way. They get really excited. So here's an example. The Baptist Press a few weeks ago posted an article about the value of BCM, particularly in the way that it relates to churches. And I watched I watched the metrics of how often that article is shared compared to how often other Baptist Press articles were shared. And typically a good article being shared by the Baptist Press happens 10 to 20 times. That article about the BCM was shared over 200 times.
Oh, great.
And I would say, I haven't talked to Jennifer Ash about this, but I would say that anytime the Alabama Baptist posts things about the BCM, it is shared above almost anything else they talk about. So what that tells me is not only are they great articles, but it resonates with our churches, that they have a concern for the college campus, and so many of them have been impacted by campus ministries, by the ACM.
Yeah.
And I would like to say to Alabama people who are listening, or anybody who's listening to this podcast, that on Alabama universities, BCMs are alive and they're moving, and we're seeing great things happening in our BCMs, and our campus ministers are just heroes of mine because they're doing great work on our campus and they love students well. And yeah, do we want to reach more students? Absolutely. Absolutely. We need to reach more students. But we are seeing some really healthy things happening across our state. And that doesn't happen without the support that we get from our churches and from our staff, just in prayer. We just started a partnership with the Alabama WMU, where they are. It's called Cultivate, and you can sign up for a weekly email for ways to pray for our campus ministers. They also have ways for you to kind of link up with a specific campus minister, and you can pray specifically for them or partner with them in specific ways. One of our BCMs in April, right before finals, had a WMU show up with, I think it might have been 2 Suburbans full of snacks to give to students. It was a little overwhelming, but what it communicated to me was a heart to help feed our students. We joke that the way to the college students' heart is through their stomach, and that there may be some truth to that. And so there's some wonderful and beautiful ways that our churches and individuals can partner with our BCMs, and one of the ways first is by prayer. And I'm grateful for the WMU to partner with us in that way and helping us tell our story.
Well, your philosophy is spot on. We appreciate that, your philosophy of ministry I'm talking about. And I also believe that we have built over the years, and you've contributed greatly, that a good team of campus ministers. Now, various locations, different subcultures, if you will. And I was thinking about that 300,000. Well, if you think about the enrollment at Auburn, 30,000 or so, and 40,000 Alabama, 70,000, that's all not quite a fourth, but it's more than a fifth of that. So it's amazing to think about that. The impact there is tremendous. Also, you mentioned about prayer, and we always like to ask how we can pray for you. Let me just say this for both of you. We've been praying for wisdom and strength for your leadership, not just the WMU, but staff here. And you well know that there's a cadre of people across the state who really have a heart for campus ministry and student ministry, and they do that. They mentioned that to me a good bit. In fact, that's one of the great joys I've had in recent years is how many more people are saying things like that. So that's really helpful. And Chris, we want you to know in this adoption process, we know that the highs and lows, ups and downs and all of that, we've certainly been praying for you and Brooke and your family. And we know that the Lord will open a door out there. It will be different perhaps than you might anticipate or we might anticipate it's going to happen. And Ben, we continue to pray. I know bringing children into a new state like this and moving a family, that's pretty challenging, but we know that please remember you're being prayed for.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Now, there might be something else you'd like for the listeners to remember you in prayer concerning. I may have covered the waterfront. If not,
I would just say that as Ben was talking about some of the exciting areas of ministry, for me personally, one of the things that has been really neat having a longer tenure is to see the stories that you get to see because of the longer tenure. But even this summer, watching the Olympics with my kids and a country popping up and my children saying, "Hey, Daddy, do you know anybody in that part of the world?" And thinking of students that were serving there at that moment, or thinking of students that have served there, or different. The Lord has given us such a unique front seat to what He's doing, not only in our state but across the world, to be cheerleaders, to be champions, and so one of the prayer requests I would have would be this is key season. This fall is key mobilization season.
Right.
I'm putting a lot of miles on the road at BCMs, at churches, talking about and challenging students to be a part of what the Lord is doing on their campus, but beyond their campus. And so my prayer would be that students would their ears, their eyes, their hearts would be open to the opportunities that are before them, and that we would be faithful to those opportunities the Lord gives us to love, to nurture, to encourage students and our families in being faithful to what the Lord has called us to.
That's very well stated. Ben?
Yeah, you said something that triggered a thought. It's so sweet. We send students everywhere. We think about what's most strategic for us to send students, but it's extra special when we get to send current Alabama University students to missionaries on the field who were at some point an Alabama BCM student. And we have a few of those. And that's a really special thing for us to do and honor that partnership while also helping reach the nations. So that's a really good word. I would say as far as prayer goes, it just continue to help pray for our campus ministers as they are resolute in reaching students. The reality of college ministry is college students can be a little flighty, and so you invest a lot.
I cannot imagine.
Yeah, you can invest a lot into students, and then all of a sudden they ghost you, and they're not there anymore. And they stop returning your calls, and that can be really discouraging. So helping our campus ministers properly have everything in perspective as they experience joy and victory, but also as a student stops returning their texts, and so helping them stay focused on, hey, we're about reaching students. And so if we have a low number tonight, it doesn't mean we're not reaching students, but we're still going after them and keeping focused on that. Inevitably, all of our campus ministers have family, and so often when we see the Lord move, we see adversity hit, and so praying for our campus ministers and their families as well. I think we can easily be distracted by keeping our focus on the things that are important, and then ultimately we want God is already moving on the campus, and we want to be where He's moving, and just asking the Lord to continue to be kind to us as we pursue students and reach them. And I'm excited about so many things that we're doing, whether it's our Timothy initiative and the calling out the called and reaching students. But we want to stay focused on reaching, discipling, and sending students. And so being prayerful for that.
I think you're laser focused, and we have this has been a very engaging, encouraging, and informative conversation. And if you watch the video of this, you'll see at a certain point here toward the end of it that Ben and Chris started talking to each other as if I wasn't even in the room. But nonetheless, it was a joy to be able to hear all of this. Thank you very much for what you do, and you'll never get enough accolades. You don't live off of affirmation accolades, but it's good to have. But you have the deepest appreciation among your colleagues, among the churches, and certainly from me. I'm very supportive and will continue to be. And thank you, Alabama Baptists, for all that you do in your local setting, and for all of those who are evangelicals and other tribes of faith. We appreciate the fact that we're on mission with the Great Commission together. We want you to continue to listen to our podcast, and we have some very good ones coming up in the future. We'll let you know about that in days to come. But for now, we want to say thank you, and we'll be able to talk to you later. God bless.